Let's go ahead and dive in. It's my privilege to moderate our first panel and to be joined by Shao Fei and Subhajit, two cybersecurity thought leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of expertise to the table to share more on the role of cyber culture in a cyber strategy. So I would like to introduce Subhajit and Shao Fei. And if Subhajit, if you would please start with a quick introduction of your background and role.
Sure. Thank you very much, Theo, and good morning, everyone. Real pleasure to be here today in the front lines and being able to share my inputs. I currently work as the Global Chief Information Security Officer of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories and also the Data Protection Officer for APAC. We are a multinational pharmaceutical company headquartered in India, Hyderabad, presence across 24 different geographies. Before my stint with the pharmaceutical sector, I have predominantly spent close to 17 years in the financial services industry, working from Bank of America to Sumitomo Bank and Max Life Insurance. Uh, I truly believe that cybersecurity is today a business problem and not just an IT problem. And it needs a concerted and a harmonious effort from every participant in the organization to be able to drive and do better security. So with that, I'm looking forward to the panel and to be able to share my thoughts with each one of you. Very happy to be here today again. Thank you.
So hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Theo, for the brief introduction earlier. I'm really excited to be one of the members of this panel. Well, by way of introduction, I'm the president of the Singapore Computer Society Cybersecurity Chapter. But in my day job, I'm the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Singapore Land Transport Authority, one of the statutory boards in the Singapore government. So I'll not talk much about my professional responsibilities as a CISO, but I'll cover that later as part of the discussion later on. I think Theo have a couple of things that will touch on those things. But in terms of background, I come from a very interesting background. I'm not trained in cybersecurity. I'm not even a computer science graduate. I'm actually an engineer by training. But my passion when I was growing up, right, was actually hacking games. That was in the 80s. Started with Ultima and playing games. But that sparked my interest in cybersecurity because I realized that I could break things and find out how to break things as part of a job. So that was what started me in cybersecurity. And later on, of course, things got very different when cybersecurity became a mainstream kind of vocation. And things today are really different from what they were in the 80s or even the 90s. Cybersecurity, as Subhajit mentioned earlier on, right, is now no longer just a technical problem. It's a business topic. And I'm quite happy to be able to share here later on as part of the fireside chat my insights on why cybersecurity culture is particularly important in the role of in how we actually run cybersecurity programs in our organizations.
Amazing, amazing. Subhajit and Shao Fei, thank you so much for the introductions. Let's dive in, and I'm going to start with a question directed here to Subhajit. Being a CISO of a large pharmaceutical organization, a large enterprise, could you help me just describe and frame what your job, and perhaps with a list of what your top 3 objectives are as a CISO?
Sure. So I think, I really believe that as a role of my CISO, my main function is to ensure I'm able to speed up innovation, accelerate better business decisions, and being able to play the role of risk governor for every organizational unit and business leaders and help them to make better cyber aware decisions. In terms of my approach, there are many, right? As a cybersecurity practitioner, there's going to be so many priorities we would typically work on. But if I were to call out the top 3, at a very strategic level, what I'm essentially, the entire organization is looking at, how do we inculcate the culture of security by design and by default in everything we do in the organization, be it culture, process, systems, projects across all the business units in the globe. The continual aspiration is to weave the culture of security in the fabric of the DNA of the organization, where every employee becomes empowered and they become the cyber sentinel for the organization. So that's at a very strategic level. At a tactical level, the objective is to really be able to do adaptive and need-based security, which is optimized yet very flexible, which focuses on the top and material risk, keeping in mind how the external threat landscape changes and whether it has a bearing on the overall risk posture of the organization or not. At an operational level, the objective is to really be able to harmonize all controls, orchestrate them into a single pane of glass to drive better manageability and better return of security investment. And what essentially plays a large role in that is how people as an organization reacts to security and privacy by design, and not just as a reinforcement brought forward as a disciplinary or a reinfect reaction, right? So these are my top priorities, and I believe security can be done better. It is a collective responsibility. It cannot be done in an isolation by an IT or a security department. So the effort is to really, how do we expand the workforce, make everybody an equal cyber responsible employee in the organization by driving that culture through. You are on mute here.
Amazing, Subhajit. Thank you. I have a couple follow-ups that I want to dive into that, but first I'll give Shao Fei an opportunity to comment as well. Shao Fei, from the perspective of the president of the Singapore Society Cybersecurity Chapter, could you please share a little bit as well, and just cover what would you describe as your top three objectives in your role as a security leader?
Okay. Well, actually, Subhajit has covered most of the things I wanted to say, but I'll maybe answer it in a different fashion. I see my role as a CISO as well as a security leader as maybe three very simple words to represent them. The first one is a gatekeeper. You know, cybersecurity, as I mentioned right earlier on, it encompasses so many things, but it's also very broadly misinterpreted in certain senses. People see cybersecurity as a hindrance to business excellence, to innovation, and it cannot be further than the truth. It could be represented as a catalyst for innovation as well as business growth as well. As you have seen from the COVID, even applications like SingPass, right, which is an authentication application, has been used for various innovative purposes such as safe entry and so on. So I think you need to change the mindset. And as in the role of a security professional, I see ourselves as gatekeepers. Gatekeepers meaning to say that we are responsible for guarding the turf of the security, the vocational responsibilities, but also to help people understand what cybersecurity really means. The second role I would think is quite important for me is actually that of a navigator. I give you an example, right? You have a lot of standards, a lot of security requirements, particularly nowadays when you have a lot of interest in cybersecurity. The regulators are very excited, coming out with a lot of guidelines, and CISOs as well as security professionals who are already inundated with a lot of work. We need to navigate around some of these very how do I call it? Some of them very complex standards and requirements, so that our business actually can continue to operate effectively, profitably, and also we do not stop running just because there's a new cybersecurity standard. So we need to navigate around all these things, as well as around the business complexities that arise out of these requirements. The third one, which is closest to my heart, which I actually am very passionate about, is the role of a grower or a farmer. I hate to use the word farmer because some people think that, well, now you become a farmer, but I use the word grower because as security leaders, we are really responsible or actually charged with planting the seeds of innovation, as Subhajit mentioned earlier on, but also to plant the seeds of future growth, our successors, those people who are going to take over us, Theo, Subhajit, and myself, right, in the years to come. We cannot wait for things to run their natural course. we as professionals, we need to plant the seeds of success and as well as inspiration. For example, this session to help people be attracted and excited about cybersecurity to want to contribute. And I think those are the three. I'll just summarize again the roles of a gatekeeper, a navigator, and a grower. Thanks.
Thank you, Shao Fei. So you guys had a couple interesting points there that I want to go back to. So Subhajit, you had talked about weaving security into the fabric of an organization, and you described your role as a CISO as helping to accelerate innovation. You have to help accelerate the business, and you also have to make sure the business is consciously making cyber aware decisions. And Shao Fei, you described your role as a CISO as a gatekeeper, as a navigator, and as a grower. So I would kind of summarize those three terms as an enabler or as an accelerator, Shao Fei. So I find this interesting because in both ways, right? You have to help accelerate your business, but if you're a gatekeeper, you also have to make sure you're containing and being very methodical in the decisions that you're making. So my question to you guys is, how do you navigate those waters? It seems like it can be quite difficult to accelerate innovation as a security leader, as a CISO. It can be very to accelerate business, accelerate decisions. But Subhajit, you work and operate in a highly regulated industry in the pharmaceutical space. How do you navigate those waters of accelerating, but also gatekeeping at the same time?
So, I kind of touched upon this a while back as well by truly doing and bringing in the culture and concept of security and privacy by design and default. So there are two ways you can do security, right? One is a proactive security, so that everything you build in the organization, everything you create in the organization has a layer of encapsulation in forms of cyber security protection and privacy protection. The second way, which is really not the very effective way, is when privacy and security really comes in at the last stage of the project, and then security is applied as an afterthought. And that is not right security. So our focus is, how do we transition ourselves and sort of create that image that, hey, we are not the guys who are there to throw a spanner into people's plan, right? Because typical security and IT functions, that's exactly we do. Right before a system is about to go live, security would stop that project and say, hey, where is the vulnerability analysis report? Unless we see that, it can't go live. We have transitioned, and I think in the industry everybody has transitioned from there, right? Because you cannot do security alone sitting in an isolated corner. It has to be a very concerted effort, and unless and until you're able to translate the technology risks into a business risk or a business problem, and with the business leaders, bring them on board as your own stakeholder, drive that visible support, you will not be able to do security well. You will just be a fixture in the wall without any true value add, so to speak, right? So we really push forward and has been able to change the culture of doing security and privacy by default. So anything in the organization that happens which touches data, systems, architecture, network, or tools and technologies, security and privacy is the first function to sort of come in and say, hey, what are you doing? What sort of data is getting processed? Where are we going to store it? Who has access to it? And then say, this is the better way to do it without inhibiting the innovation, without limiting the pace, without stopping it from getting executed. But then security is also going to be much more adaptive in the coming days, and even it is relevant for today as well. You can bring down the hammer everywhere, right? So what is material in terms of risk, that needs to be understood. So if it is a significantly critical innovation which processes a lot of confidential and personal data, you might need the strictest possible standards in terms of security. But if it is a simple workload, doesn't touches any confidential systems, doesn't process too many personal data, the security has to be moderate. So how do you involve the right dose of security measures depending on the project in itself? That is how you maintain speed. That is how you maintain the balance. Theo?
Absolutely. And when you talk about understanding risk, right? If understanding risk is a core component to this entire thing, obviously we're all familiar here, and it's the whole concept behind the front lines. It's the whole concept behind Cybersecurity Awareness Month here every October. With one of the biggest risks every company faces is the human element, right? So Shao Fei, kind of pivoting into that specific risk, could you maybe elaborate why is cybersecurity culture important? What challenges do organizations face with cybersecurity culture and mitigating risks around the human element, whether your organization is large or small? Could you talk a little bit, please, Shao Fei?
I think that's a really great question, by the way, because it is not the question that a lot of cybersecurity practitioners often ask themselves right at the start of when they are charged with running a cybersecurity program. As an example, right, when I started on my job in one of the organizations I worked for, the immediate or the simplest way to tackle cybersecurity is what? Is to go out there and ask a vendor what is the sexiest or the greatest tech solution out there, and then you implement that solution. And you realize that actually it didn't solve the problem. You still, users that are the last line of defense, also the first line of breach. And that really boils down to the whole notion of culture. But culture is not something that the cybersecurity department alone can tackle. It is an organization problem. But somebody in the organization must step up and start to catalyze that change to really change the culture, right? So the perennial question is who then is in charge of that particular change, right? So as I mentioned earlier on in my previous sharing, the role of a gatekeeper is also to to explain to the other C-level executives and senior executives in the organization what it means to change the culture. And if organization transformation and development is not part of that organization's culture to start with, it will be quite a difficult journey, I assure you. But I think one of the things of learning or sharing, if I may, right, is actually, again, the COVID pandemic, because, overnight, a lot of the stuff that we were trying to do, right, to digitally transform, to introduce cybersecurity from a work from home kind of environment, right, those things took ages to convince the management and even to get budget for. But guess what? With the COVID pandemic, everything changed, right? And what is so special about this is because there was an opportunity out of this whole crisis to actually do some of those things. So I suppose culture is also one of the side, products of something of a crisis. A crisis can actually generate positive culture and also to help adapt the organization to the new challenges and the new frontiers that they are facing. Because if the organization doesn't see this as a danger, as a risk that it must tackle at the organizational level, the culture will not change. And that is the reason why, as a cybersecurity program, if you focus on, for example, passwords, if you focus on technical controls and all this stuff, right? I don't think it will stick very well with the users or the employees, particularly because they do not see it as something that's important or organic to them, right? And then it brings me to the other question. When you run a cybersecurity program or to address the cultural part, right? The first thing you need to do is understand the culture in the organization to start off with. Because if the organization does not value data, for example, as an asset, then you cannot use that as an engine to actually drive the change of the culture. You need to dive into the very thing that is important and organic to the organization that they value. And I think the last thing I want to share is there's no one size fits all kind of approach for cultural transformation or even cybersecurity. Because if you look at regulations and regulators per se, right, often you have a whole set of policy requirements that you need to follow. But compliance to those requirements does not necessarily mean that you're secure. We have seen so many examples of this. You look at the financial industry, you look at the medical healthcare industry, you look around the world, right? Where are all the victims of all this ransomware and all these attacks? Ransomware, for example, it doesn't happen by magic. You get to have users who are not that they are ignorant, they are aware. They are cyber aware, but it's just that the culture part of it, they did not feel that it was important for them to take extra caution. And those attacks happen then, right? I'm not saying that is the reason for all the attacks, but I think that is one of of the key reasons I think cybersecurity remains one of the most challenging areas that organizations need to look into. And you're absolutely right, Theo and Subhajit, by what you shared earlier on, right? You need to have a strategy around this as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Shao Fei. And you even started diving into the details, which was going to be my follow-up question, which is fantastic. It's a great segue to take to Subhajit. So you talked a little bit about the ways to effectively mitigate that human risk across an organization and to build cyber culture. If I can just summarize, it's to have a top-down approach. It has to start with leadership. You as a security leader, or you as an executive decision maker and influencer at the company, you have to set that tone. And it sounds like as that gatekeeper, Shao Fei, you have to be able to manage other leaders at your company to help set that tone and influence that culture from the foundation up. So Subhajit, could you share a couple other best practices if an organization wanted to start building cyber culture and they are in that role as an influencer? Maybe they're an IT manager or an IT director, or even all the way up to a chief information security officer. What are some steps that individuals in those types of leadership, IT and infosec positions, what are some steps they can take?
Well, so there are several, and I think this is probably one of the most ignored areas of cyber presently, because simply there are too many things to do and too less of a time, right? I'm reminded of this interview I recently heard from one of the senior CISOs in the organization, in the industry, Jamil Farish. He's the CISO of Equifax right now, and he was bought in after Equifax had the massive data breach. And it was really a hot seat in a true sense, right, when he came in to bring about the organization. And when it was asked that what is that single most factor which you took up first to change, he said culture, and culture of security and privacy, right? And then there are several things which can be done and which needs to be done for sure. One is, of course, the top-down approach, very visible sponsorship and support from the senior leaders, and active support by living the philosophy of security culture and really walking the talk. It can't be superficial. You can't be a leader and say, let's do better cybersecurity, but you own yourself flouting the rules, right? So you got to really preach, and practice what you preach, sort of thing. Few other things which we should do and which we continuously been seeing done in the industry. Number one is targeted interventions, right? So it is important to understand that see, we are dealing with people here, okay, and people has a mind on its own. You just can't fit them into a one size box, right? And exactly the reason why there are different personas involved into it. So very different human beings. A lot depends on the way he or she is conditioned, the thought process, the social equation in the world. And while technology definitely aids to sort of ring fence the behavioral aspect and to ensure there is nothing inadvertent which can happen, but then there are so many things which goes on to that human brain, right? And that is why culture becomes important. So the targeted interventions are very important. While there are system driven checks, there has to be an opportunity to identify those learning moments, those coaching moments. Maybe somebody has tried putting a easy password or the pet's name as a password. Do you have the ability to pick that up and say, hey, you know what, it is very easy to crack this password. Why don't you keep a password which is strong, a non-dictionary word? Second is purposeful and positive reinforcement, okay? Given the days, the way we operate in, the carrot and stick method simply does not work. It has to be positive enforcement and purposeful reinforcement as well. So how do we positively encourage the right behavior? People proactively finding out a risk in your setup, people seeing an incident and proactively reporting it, people come back to you and say, hey, I have a question, how do I do my job better with the right kind of security because I think it could be improved. Those are the protagonists of cybersecurity culture awareness, right? And this is where we should encourage them, we should reward them. A good practice, what we do in the organization is every month we give away a Cyber Sentinel Award to a couple of people who have been instrumental in helping us to identify risk and driving that culture of security. Third is while many of us, we do a lot of awareness campaigns, most of these are rather passive in nature, sending out a theme-based email in a week or so. That doesn't work. it has to be active. It has to be a campaign where people get to participate. Okay, it can be a phishing simulation. It could be on-the-spot quiz. It can also be to the extent where you bring them on board and say, hey, you are the security officer for your business unit for the next 3 months, and whatever you do will have an impact on your scorecard or your KRA as well. Okay, and you help them and you coach them, right? Last but not the least is also to test the culture. Okay, check reactions, check the responses, do sort of a red team assessment with people, throw away USB sticks and see, do people pick them up or not? Do those clean desk and clean screen audits. One important intervention which has sort of helped us a lot is, see, there are so many assurance functions in an organization, right? So there is security, there is privacy, there is legal, there is audit, there is risk management, and each one of us sort of work in a silo. So in our organization, we have bought this beautiful project called Integrated Assurance Leadership Program. A couple of people, handfully, are selected based on rigorous interviews who really wants to become an assurance leader. And over the period of 2.5 years, they get a chance to work in each of these assurance functions, either legal, security, privacy, and understand what assurance essentially means and how to harmonize and integrate them together. After the tenure is over, after 2 years, they have an option to join any one of these teams and really take that up as a profession. So because there's a dearth of professionals anyways in the industry, right? How difficult it is to hire a good resource. So how do we fill that gap? Is through the people who are down there, the boots on the ground, they're close to the business, they know what works and what doesn't. Training them is actually getting the job done in a large way. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Amazing, Subhajit. You hit on a number of important things there, starting with practice what you preach. You have to say if you are a security or an infosec leader. Targeted interventions, you had given a couple example of targeted interventions, more of scenario-based assessments to really test your culture. And you talked about positive reinforcement, providing words to your staff as opposed to punishment to really improve and build culture that can last for a long time. Shao Fei, you got the short straw here with having to go second. But you've already touched on not having a one-size-fit-all approach, trying to customize security programs to build culture. Anything else that you'd like to add, or would you like to elaborate a little bit on that point?
Well, maybe let me elaborate a little bit more on what Subhajit said earlier on about the positive reinforcement aspect, because that to me is an absolutely important and critical part of education. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have kids at home, and seeing them grow up, I have learned a few things from them as well. Right, I have realized that positive reinforcement works better than punishment. The more you tell them not to do something, the more they will try to do that just to prove you wrong, or to test whether you are really serious about what you said when don't do this, don't do that. I think for human beings, not that they are irresponsible, but there is this inclination in human beings to also want to test the limits. So when you then the natural reaction of security professionals and security teams is to actually make it as inconvenient or as challenging for them to change that in the way they work. I'll give you an example. For example, working from home, right? Which almost all of us have to do right now. When we started, we had a lot of questions from employees regarding how they use the enterprise equipment, whether they can do this, whether they can do that. And the reason for that was because it was so clunky. The security requirements, the technical controls were so clunky and so onerous. And therefore, if you continue on that path, I realized that the risk was that because of that cultural element as well, employees are not going to do what you tell them to do. They will resort to things like shadow IT, for example. They are going to use their own equipment to do things that you never intended. And how are you going to defend against those things that you do not have visibility of? So I think that is one of the reasons why, security education and awareness is absolutely important. The second thing which struck me, just in terms of sharing what Subhajit said earlier about reporting incidents and do not kill the messenger kind of approach, right? I think that is really very key. Because in a lot of organizations these days, the IT security departments that are they are sized not as security departments to run the entire organization. They're probably 4 men, 5 men strong, and they really do not have the capacity to address every single incident, whether it's real incident or false incident. And therefore, you have a climate where you make it, you push the limit as to how much will you tolerate reports of false positives, and users naturally will become quite worried or apprehensive about maybe highlighting a ransomware or suspicious email, for example, because they know that if you do so, either A, you're not going to respond very quickly, B, you're probably going to ask a ton of questions that require to do more of the support themselves, and C, making them look stupid because it was a false positive and the whole chain of supervisors and superiors all know about it. So I think that cultural element needs to be addressed before something like that can happen. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I think more needs to be considered. Yeah, I think that's what I had to share for this particular question.
So let's fast forward a little bit through this cycle, and let's take the scenario where a security leader or an IT leader has followed your advice, and they've implemented some of these different programs and executed some of these tactics that you guys have shared. Now, a long period of time, right? Over the course of maybe 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and beyond, is cyber culture measurable? How do you measure it? How do you report it? How do you manage it upstream to the board? Could you elaborate a bit on that, please? And we'll start with Subhajit.
Well, so this is one of the most trickiest questions one can ever attempt to answer. So there is no straightforward answer to that, right? So there are two ways one can attempt to measure the effectiveness of this culture. I'll talk about the qualitative ways and then the quantitative ways. The qualitative ways is rather different one. This is where the CISO office has to really go down, talk to different business users, and understand whatever controls have we built in. Is it prohibitive in nature? Does it help them? Does it augment their working capacity? Is there a gap, and so on and so forth? So I think it is a lot more qualitative, and there is no one size fits approach. You will have to try and adopt different methods to see what works and what doesn't. In terms of quantified approach, this is rather easy. You can do several things there. You can do those cyber aware or the culture tests, which can be a periodic short snippets, 5 minutes, 2 minutes tests, and see how people are faring. Or it can be an annual information security or cybersecurity assessment and training, and see the degree of percentage of people who passes with flying colors and those who don't, sort of. Then you can also do those phishing simulations and see how many people get caught, and then pull them up for a training and then retrain them and retest on them again and see what is the degree. So over a period of time, when you see that you started with 40% people getting phished, and then after 6 months or 1 year, you are able to bring it down to 10%, there's a little movement there, right? Another important way to measure the cyber awareness or cyber culture is how many people reaching out to information security and proactively talking about a problem. It could be a lost laptop. It could be a phishing email coming into their mailbox. It could be something they have overheard about somebody trying to do something wrong. Or maybe we have seen instances where users have seen the organization is being referred in a social media in a negative connotation, and they want to bring it to the notice of information security to deep dive. I think those are very quantitative, measurable ways that are people in sync with what you're trying to do, and are they partnering with you in a true spirit, and they're coming back to you. So the quantified approach is rather easy. The qualified approach is rather difficult. What also goes in a long way to aid and foster the qualitative approach is to be able to go and speak with the business leaders. So every business units will have their quarterly review meetings, their monthly review meetings. Can you secure a 5-minute spot? Go and talk about one particular cyber problem and how people can help. Those 5 minutes are amplified into 15 minutes over a period of time, and I think that will always reach the mark.
And Shao Fei, do you have anything you'd like to add in regards to cyber culture?
Yeah, quite a number of points. the first thing to ask yourselves as well as your organization when you talk about something like measuring the cybersecurity culture or awareness is the first thing is to ask the question, what is important to you and what is important to the organization. Everybody likes metrics, right? Everybody likes numbers because they are an indicator of success and potentially how well you have performed. I mean, for myself, how well you have performed in your role as a CISO, as a security professional. So everybody likes metrics and numbers, but like I said earlier on, having a stellar score, right? Fantastic numbers does not mean necessarily that your organization is secure, or it does not mean that all your employees are engaged. The word here is engaged. Okay. To me, in terms of the qualitative measure of the success, I think for me personally is the word engagement. Because if I'll just share a short example with you is that we have run many security awareness programs in my current organization before, but what struck me as a pleasant surprise was that employees started to come forward to either ask me or my colleagues, about things that were not presented in the stuff that we talked about during the seminars. It could be things that are revolving around their personal spaces at homes. How do they secure their Wi-Fi? How do they make sure that their kids or their parents' phones are secure? And these are the things that actually strike me as an indicator that the cultural element has changed, that they are now interested, personally engaged, and want to actually improve cybersecurity. And then you can actually navigate, as I said, navigator, you then navigate the narrative to talk about, actually, since you're doing this in your personal lives, do you think it is not important to also do this in your professional capacity as part of the organization? Because it's important to the people who are working around you. And that's the second part of it. The responsibility part is not just about the employee or the person per se. It's also about the people who are important to that employee. For example, if he loses the data of his loved ones, right? His loved ones may get attacked or targeted in this kind of attacks. So I think it's important for them to also understand why cybersecurity does not only revolve around one single person or just them. The other thing I would say is that there is Subhajit has covered quite a fair bit about the qualitative measures. So those are pretty standard. I guess what is important to realize is also the culture of I'm in Singapore, so we have this term in Singapore called kiasu. Kiasu basically means that we are not, they are afraid to lose to somebody else. Everybody is competitive and wants to win somehow, right? So the danger of coming up with a quantitative measure of success, even if it's important to you, even if it matters to you, right, it may not be important to that other organization or that other sub-organization, as Subhajit mentioned, other stakeholders in the organization. For example, right, Group A or Group B, Group C, for example, in the organization, they may see security as something very, very key. So they will put this in their organizational KPI, and they say that every year we must try to get the top, and it becomes a competition, a contest for them, right? And that is really a negative, because once that happens, it drives the wrong mindset all down the line. Everybody becomes so, I won't use the word passionate, so involved in the whole process of just trying to get the numbers right. And I don't think that is the right way to do cybersecurity. And unfortunately, that is how a lot of the organizations, even those that I'm connected to, they work on that premise. So I don't think that is the best way to do cybersecurity awareness or to actually measure cultural awareness. The last point, if I may add, right, is about cyber fatigue. Look at the numbers from a negative way, right? What are the numbers of the people who are, the word I use is involved but not engaged? That means they are performing well, in your cybersecurity challenges or whatnot, right? They consistently show the numbers, they do well in the exams or whatever. But in this population of those staff, right, how many of them are repeat offenders or they victims of phishing or whatever, right? And that actually shows you a very accurate measure of how successful your program is. So the message I always bring to my staff is stop deceiving yourself with hearing only the good things. Because if your culture is, if your KPI is about the numbers, I'm quite sure that you will start hearing all the good things and ignore the bad news. I think we need to look at the bad news as also a measure of success, especially where cybersecurity awareness is concerned. Thanks.
Shao Fei, I want to go back to a point you made because I thought it was really interesting, and it's about you alluded to how you can position as a security leader, how you can position the importance of cyber awareness in culture, and the perspective or the way that you position this was making it relevant to someone based on their families and how you can educate them to and their family at home. I do find this really interesting. So could we just go back to that, Shao Fei? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly and make sure the audience is as well. What you're saying is when you're trying to increase the awareness of your employees at your company, instead of going to them and saying, by doing X, Y, and Z, you will protect our company, is what you are recommending we tell our staff is if you do X, Y, and Z, you can actually protect your own personal finances and family and those of the people you love?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, a recent security bulletin that my team had sent around the organization is something around WhatsApp scams, right? So WhatsApp is not something that we standardize across the organization, but everybody uses WhatsApp. And we decided to send out the security advisory around WhatsApp because everybody uses it. But the key message behind the advisory was not about WhatsApp. It's actually about the way people convey sensitive information or send sensitive or personal photos around WhatsApp and risk losing them if you're not careful. So that is the part where then we segue into the part about data security and why it's important to do the same in the organization. So what we are doing is that we are trying to use the personal story to get people to be interested first, right? I'll just share another nugget with you is that I did a very informal survey with my colleagues and around the security advisories that we send quite often, and that has to do with cyber fatigue as well. I had a nasty revelation that actually I discovered that a lot of the employees in the organization do not read the advisories at all. Right, the moment they see something from the security office, they delete it. They send it to the spam box, and so how will you make it interesting enough that people want to look at it, right? So if you have something that is viral, right? If you have something that is personal and people start sending it out, even in a non-conventional way, perhaps they talk to people over lunch about it. Hey, do you see the security advisory about that the security office sent earlier this afternoon? And they say, oh, I deleted it, And they say, oh, I think you better go and take a look at it because they talk about this WhatsApp, all these things. So it becomes a topic of conversation during lunches and so on, And I think that is important. People start to talk about it, and they become that your ambassador, naturally ambassador of the cybersecurity awareness program as well. So I think that has been a huge success factor for what we do here also.
I love that. I love that. So let's continue through this journey of an infosec leader. Okay, so taking your advice to incorporate cyber culture, the different strategies and tactics that you've shared to build cyber culture. Now they've measured it too, right? They've gone through some of the qualitative and quantitative ways to measure cybersecurity culture and awareness. And then boom, 2020 hits. And we're all hit with a ton of surprises and pandemics and changes happening all throughout the globe, right? A lot of unknown, a lot of unfamiliar territory, right? I think one of the most challenging roles for someone in 2020 was a security leader. they were hit with a moment's notice of massive, massive changes across an organization, and very little time to quickly react and adopt a different strategy. So if you guys could just elaborate a little bit on that. So you go through these first steps that we've talked about, 2020 hits, and you're forced to make some pivots. What are some strategies you guys implemented to make quick pivots, to rally a group of people around you to be able to adapt to the new environment, and lastly, be prepared for the cyber threat landscape transitioning into the future? Maybe we'll start with, let's go with Subhajit first.
Okay, sure. So 2020 has been, truly unprecedented. Given a chance, I would like to rewind back and start at January 1st and see how different the world could be. But I believe, along with all the challenges, it has also brought in immense opportunities. Okay. Uh, if I were to sum up what has changed in 2020, I would largely say the cyber everywhere mindset, right? Because people were locked down, you're at home, there's a social distancing, quarantine, and so on. So we have slowly, inadvertently transgressed into a far more digitally connected world. And essentially, I would call it a vulnerable world as well. So it is not just about work, but also family. So you have collaboration platforms, your digital services and channels. There are new innovations, the rapid digital adoptions. Sales has become an electronic route. There are e-detailing with doctors, telemedicine is coming, e-pharmacy has come in, video consultations, even a store visit is an e-store visit where you electronically visit a store, choose a product, make a purchase, and it gets delivered to your home. Perimeters has been shattered, right? So the traditional boundaries between internet and intranet is long gone. Organizations which were relatively cloud shy are cloud first in nature. And then there's a huge proliferation of bring your own devices, remote working, device agnostic access, and so on and so forth. So a lot has changed. And this has truly been the litmus test, or the hoop of fire, if I may call it, for many organizations. Does your BCP and GR really exist on a piece of paper? Or does it truly stand the test of time? Fortunately, we've been able to sustain that well. We had several DR measures and adopted. I want to talk about a couple of them which are relevant from the cyber security mindset. One is we have started moving away from a device-based security to a data-centric security. So it does not matter which device coming in from which network, till the time it is touching the data. Depending on who is touching the data, the access has been designed in such a way it brings in the element of condition as well as context. So that has helped. So when people started working from home, whether they're working from their official computer or their personal laptop or their smartphone, it does not make a difference, because depending on who you are and what you need to access and what condition and what context you're accessing from, the access principles are being derived out of that, right? Couple of things we also did was to ensure applications are available online, systems are available, VPNs are working, the standard run-of-the-mill operations. I think two very distinct risk that has emanated out of the entire COVID and work from home situation, if I were to call it. One is there was a huge rush to enhance the digital quotient, because lot many standard traditional businesses which involves people to go out and meet people, that was not happening, right? So you need to have a digital medium to fill that bridge. So digital adoption or digital transformation become a priority for many. And when that becomes a priority, security and privacy can become a secondary consideration. So the one key risk that has largely emerged is the risk of shadow IT. And these days, you don't need to come to IT for your network storage or hardware, right? You can go to a vendor, they can host a website or an app on a cloud. You just got to pay, and boom, there's a website ready. You don't know if it is compliant or not, right? So that's a bigger problem. The second challenge which I see is really with people and with the culture. There is an, so to speak, exploration of threats, right? So a lot of organizations have gone through restructuring, there were layoffs, there were pay cuts, there's a lot of stress and anxiety amongst people everywhere. Very, very unprecedented lockdown, you are confined in your home. All that has enabled, or rather forced, people to lower their guards. So a cyber conscious employee who was pretty savvy to know when a phishing email is coming in, because he is right now stressed with so many things going on around the world, very new different setup altogether. He's more susceptible to click on something, give away the credential, and bring down the entire network, right? So those are the two key things. One risk element which is also sort of amplified right now is the risk from insider threats. A disgruntled or a retrenched employee with a system access, with a computer in hand, with available bandwidth is a perfect recipe for disaster. So I think from the culture side of it, again, we will go back to what we've been saying. How do you bridge that gap of shadow IT is by really practicing the cyber culture of security by design. And when the culture is important to understand, uh, can we prevent people, or we understand what sort of people are we dealing with? Careless users, malicious users, compromised users, users who doesn't know that they have been compromised. How do we bring in some analytics to understand the huge amount of signals we generate from our preventive and detective controls? How do we do the correlation? How do we do the investigation? How do we do the consequence action management? Everything put together from the culture perspective. I think that is what is important, and this is where the entire organization has to come in together. Because how do you engage with your groups? How do you engage with your leadership? Do you have mental wellness programs been built in at the time of those stress and anxiety? Everything goes hand in hand at this time when it comes to culture or the security culture of the organization. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Shao Fei, is there anything you'd like to add?
I would say that the pandemic, when it came, I'll give the Singapore example. It was a Friday afternoon, I remember very well, that we got the email to say that everybody has to start working from home from Monday afternoon onwards. So that gave us the weekend, right? Saturday, Sunday, and probably the earlier part of Monday to get everything switched from office to work from home. And there was no buts or exceptions to that. It has to be done. So the cybersecurity function was actually turned upside down because of this work from home arrangement. It happened so quickly that we did not have time to brief the users or even the supervisors on what the expectations are. And that really, from one phase moving to the next phase, where staff started to ask questions about, oh, how do we actually change our passwords, if they are not connected to the, because not everybody had VPN at that point in time, and they had to get VPN tokens, right? So it was a huge logistical challenge to issue them the tokens, to educate them how to use the VPN, to educate them to use to change the passwords. And the passwords, because of the policy restrictions, are so complicated and so complex that some of the users were not accustomed to it or not used to it. And I would say that that whole episode was an inflection point for the cybersecurity professionals, particularly in the industry who were affected by the COVID. The inflection point is because of this, because the momentum of change, the cadence of change was so quick, so fast, that a lot of the security professionals who were used to instituting policies, doing governance work, they did not have to do operations work before. So they were actually exposed to operations for the first time because of COVID. And that was an inflection point where a lot of them, face stress that Subhajit mentioned, right? The mental wellness, all these things, and a lot of them gave up. And the worry for me as an industry professional, industry leader, is that we worry that some of these professionals who are very good leave the profession because of this whole thing, And the last point I want to share is actually the evolution of threats. So because of the work from home, we have actually seen that there's a lot more instances of business email compromise. As exactly like what Subhajit mentioned, a lot of transactions are now done online, and there need not be face to face. And therefore, some of these these phishing emails, they actually take advantage of this to entice businesses to surrender or to transfer funds, because of this. For example, they say that, your contract is overdue, and this tenant is threatening to sue you, and you have to pay this amount of money, and so on. So some of these departments, because the work from home arrangement, and because of the time pressure, they just make decisions on the point in time, and therefore they fall into become a victim. And I would say that culture, again, I would say that the real danger or the real avalanche of it, I hope it doesn't happen, but I'm quite concerned that it might, is in the next 3 or 4 months. This is the period where a lot of organizations do what we call appraisal, right? To evaluate the work done and probably decide to either promote or to how well they reward the employees. And I think that there will be a lot of employees who are not happy or disgruntled, and therefore that is the part where you have insider threats, where disgruntled employees actually become easy bait, easy targets, and they are, well, not too concerned about protecting the organization that doesn't take care of them. So that is one. The second one is about fraud. Right. So fraud in the pre-COVID period is that everybody was in office, so you probably would have easier time with the analytics and looking at the data to detect fraud. And but work from home has actually, if you like, put everybody on garden leave, that kind of thing, right? For close to a year. And how do you then detect suspicious activities when everybody is already working from home? How do you do that? Given, as I said earlier, not everybody is using the enterprise IT environment for their work. So how do you do that? Yeah, so that, I think, a couple of things that I wanted to share at closing, because the whole complexion of cybersecurity has changed because of COVID, because of work from home. Working from home, remote working is not something that is entirely new. A lot of organizations have been doing that. The problem is that a lot of the companies and organizations that are not accustomed to working from home, they are now thrown into this new realm of working. And I think cybersecurity was the last thing on their mind when they switched over. That was what I was trying to say. And now we are only starting to see the dangers actually manifesting in themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Shao Fei. And we're moments away here from transitioning over to Warner, the head of cybersecurity awareness and training at Standard Chartered Bank. But before we bring in Ellie, I do have one last question here for Shao Fei and Subhajit. I am aware that we do have an audience of some people who are already in that cybersecurity leadership role that we've talked a lot about today, but we also do have people who are aspiring to move into that role. So just to close here with Subhajit and Shao Fei, if you could maybe just provide 1 or 2 quick bullets, what is some strong advice that you would give to an aspiring cybersecurity who wants to one day become that chief information security officer, cybersecurity president in a large organization?
Okay, so I can
Go ahead,
first.
Subhajit, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, so I can go first. So there is no substitute to hard work and continuous training. So I'll not talk about that. But to be a very effective cybersecurity leader, one has to be a good business leader as well. You must have the ability to articulate a technical problem into a business problem. Understand the doomsday scenarios for the business, work backwards to see if they can happen because of a cyber event. And that's the moment of integration. The second point I want to leave the audience back with is listen to the business leaders and people on the ground. The risks identified from the business are far more effective as they're the closest to the ground. Ensure that those dipstick surveys are done very often, and you get to hear the raw, unadulterated view positively. Yeah. Third is the ability to break the barriers of the CISO office. Security is really with everybody. So if you will, appoint security officers in different business units, groom them, coach them, let them work with the BUs, drive security under your coaching and guidance. That's a lot better way to do security. Last but not the least, try and create an integrated assurance framework with the co-assurance functions. Culture is really driven well when there is an integrated approach as opposed to a siloed approach. Thank you.
So for me, I would say that there's a vibrant community of infosec enthusiasts in Singapore. For example, the Singapore Computer Society, Association of Information Security Professionals, as well as Division Zero. So please look up Google for some of these organizations and communities and take part, participate, and find an opportunity to speak to the leaders around the industry, and maybe you'll find nuggets of wisdom that may guide you along your journey to becoming the next CISO or becoming the next security leader in the industry. Thanks.
Amazing. Fantastic advice from you both. We are out of time. I want to personally thank you both. And I'm sure the audience really appreciated a lot of your best practices, insights. I definitely put you on the spot a little, but you guys were fantastic. And I appreciate the openness and transparency into the jobs that you guys have. So Shay and Subhajit, thank you guys so much.